Odongwana as he lays the framework for the next 3 years in terms of the fiscal framework. Of course, they're giving two options, whether to raise taxes or cutting expenditure. We get political reaction now from the DA's finance spokesperson, Dr. Mark Burke. Has the finance minister struck the right chords in terms of consolidating spending as well as ensuring that our debt levels are perfectly sustainable?
I don't know if it's perfectly sustainable, but there are many positive signs coming out of this midterm budget policy statement. We are seeing a consolidation of our debt, and we should be able to maintain it for the first time basically in 15 years below 78%, meaning it won't keep rising. That's important to South Africans because as we spend more on servicing our debt, we're less able to spend on things we need, such as hospitals, schools and police officers. Likewise, what we've seen here in this budget being announced is an inflation target of 3%, which is a big breakthrough. It's unfortunate that the Reserve Bank, although independent, and Treasury had to be at each other's necks for the last few months, but we are happy to see that this inflation target has been locked in, and that's important to South Africans because it means the cost of living crisis is, to an extent, we're able to contain it. Lastly, something important to point out here is we're embedding the culture of spending reviews, which means with each cycle we need to announce where we found inefficiencies and what we'll do to eliminate those, and just in this cycle alone we've indicated a 6 billion rand plus saving that should materialize over the medium term.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Mark Burke, the DA's finance spokesperson. Let me turn to my left now and bring in the ACDP's chief whip, Steve Swart, the finance minister, laying down the finance framework. As the ACDP, what do you think of what is presented today?
Well, the ship is turning in the right direction over the long term. In the medium term, we are still concerned about low economic growth and, of course, that resulting in the debt levels. And whilst my colleague has indicated that the debt levels are stabilizing, it is still very high and 1.2% higher than what was announced in March this year. So the debt service costs are still very high, and what we do need is far greater accelerated economic growth to address jobs and, of course, to address poverty. We are pleased to see that the inflation target has come in and that's been set because that will help in the long term. We're also pleased to see that the programs, expenditure programs, are being looked at and, of course, increased revenue collection. Because as we know, the minister at the beginning of the year said if there isn't increased revenue collection, there'll be a 20 billion rand shortfall in the next financial year, which will mean increases in taxes. The ACDP does not support increases in taxes. Our supporters and the South Africans in general demand value for every rand tax that they've been paying. They haven't received that now, and let us trust going forward that as the ship turns around and proves our fiscal environment, that the tax situation, the fiscal environment will stabilize.
All right, thank you so much, Steve Swart, the chief whip of the ACDP. Now the leader of the EFF, Julius Malema, for his reaction.
Let's get your thoughts just on the budget. Well, we reject this new inflation targeting because we think that it's going to increase the cost of borrowing. And we know at the center of borrowing is the masses of our people. There's a repetition of what he said at the beginning of the year. There's no clear plan on how we're going to deal with unemployment, how are we going to deal with policing in South Africa, because we've got a serious problem of resources in the police, and how are we going to deal with issues of defense itself. As we're speaking today, everybody's complaining about borders that are pouring. Part of the people who can help us to maintain stability and order in those borders is the army. Our army is not properly funded, and we've seen that when they were in the DRC. This is basically making sure that they outsource that which government is supposed to do. They are making sure that the private sector is at the right position to compete with services that should be provided by the state. In that, you are undermining the state capacity to deal massively with infrastructural development. There's no clear plan on how to increase health and how to deal with issues of unemployment and also the deteriorating infrastructure in South Africa.
If it wasn't for inflation targeting, what would you have preferred?
No, we must sustain what we agreed on earlier. But because the governor of the Reserve Bank unilaterally just makes a decision, and we want to be dancing to the tune of the private sector and so-called foreign investment, we end up changing our inflation targeting because we want to impress the few. That's why the EFF says the Reserve Bank must be nationalized because it takes decisions that are not based in the interest of the working class in South Africa.
Yeah. Giving them all these aspects, however, would say that we're getting more revenue, spending a little bit more as well at this time. Is that helpful to South Africa's economy, as you heard it from the speech?
Well, more revenue means more into their pockets. You know that they steal. The more money we make, the more money we save, the more corruption goes high. No clear strategy on how to deal with corruption, because we can have surplus, we can grow the economy, we can have more revenue, but in the absence of a clear strategy on how you're going to fight corruption, is equal as not having collected more. Because it means nothing.
All right, we're going to cut out of that. That is the leader of the EFF, and we bring in more political parties now, as we bring in the leader of BOSA, Musi Maimane. Firstly, as BOSA, do you think the minister is taking us in the right direction in terms of ensuring that there is a fiscal discipline?
It's important that when we talk about fiscal discipline, that we build state capacity. Now, in many ways, we can all stand here and say it's good that we're off the grey listing, but let's never forget that it was the ANC that brought us into grey listing. And so now it's the hard work of all the discipline that's required. It's doing the big things, such as cutting SETAs, cutting agencies, because when you want to make the state more efficient, at this point in time, we've got too many agencies, too many SETAs, and we can't deliver. I want to welcome the minister's announcement about the transparency on digitization of procurement. I think that's important. It will eradicate corruption and citizens can know. It's also important that we focus on a growth agenda that invests in infrastructure. So those are positive initiatives. But ultimately, what I would like to urge is that the challenge that the minister faces is that expenditure directed towards citizens themselves, which is safety and policing. There was no limited mention of that, and I'm concerned that we behave as though we don't have a crime problem in the country, yet that's the biggest issue in our country.
All right, thank you so much, Musi Maimane, the leader of BOSA. For more reaction now on the economic front, Nompu is standing by.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. Well, I'm joined by Brian Molefe. He's from the MK party. Thank you very much, Mr. Molefe. Just give us a sense of your feeling around the delivery of today's midterm budget.
It's just quite extraordinary that in the entire medium-term budget policy statement that the minister has just read out, there was no mention of unemployment, which is the single biggest challenge that is confronting South Africa today. One would have expected that there would be measures to deal with the problem. There was not a single mention of poverty. There was not a single mention of inequality. There was not a single mention of the National Development Plan, whose targets are out of kilter and are not going to be met by 2030. There was not even a mention of the medium-term budget, medium-term planning framework that has just been announced to take us to 2030, because quite frankly, I think that we get told these targets, these plans, these grand plans, but nobody follows up on what is happening with them. Nobody updates us, and we actually are now convinced that the government is not, of national unity, is not convinced to dealing with the real issues of poverty, of unemployment, of inequality.
And what were your feelings around the confirmation that 3% is now the new inflation target, with a 1%, basically it's a range of 2 to 4%?
Dealing with inflation is quite important because inflation increases prices and that affects the poor. We agree that we have to deal with inflation. But I wish somebody could deal with unemployment with the same vigor, with the same determination, because unemployment, tonight there is a family that is going to go to bed without food because there is no food on the table. So inflation for the vast majority of our people is just a big English word that does not have meaning. People want jobs, people are hungry, people are poor, and there is huge inequality in our country.
Mr. Molefe, thank you very much. Let me hand it over now to my colleague Bulelani Philip.
All right, thank you so much once again, Nompu. Of course, we're taking more political reactions right here on the floor. And I bring it now Action SA Parliamentary Leader Athol Trollip. Of course, coming into this budget, people are complaining about the cost of living, the rising cost of living. Do you think the minister has done enough to alleviate this cost of living for the poor?
No, I don't think so at all. Unemployed people find it very difficult to live. I mean, obviously, we've got high unemployment in this country. It's way too high. It's unsustainable. We don't see enough talk about growth. Sub-Saharan African countries, developing countries are performing much better than we are. Growth is anathema to the ANC government. We just can't see economic growth. Then the minister spoke about revenue. I think revenue collection is really important. We were the party that championed more funding for SARS. SARS has shown that they can collect more, not just from the man in the street who pays tax, but around the illicit economy. I was very pleased to hear the minister talk about the illicit economy, because we will never meet revenue targets and we won't have enough money to govern properly as the illicit market and economy grows. And we've seen it growing. He mentioned cigarettes, alcohol, and not only is it illicit, it's also dangerous for people who are consuming illicit products, but it also makes it unprofitable for people trading legitimately. We've seen that. Big South African companies becoming unsustainable because of the illicit economy. So we need to do more about that.
But do we have enough monitoring mechanisms like labor inspectors and inspectors and the like?
So the money that we can save or get more revenue, we can use that money to better fund SARS and the South African Police Services and border management, because if those three as a triumvirate don't work together, we will never combat the illicit economy. But I want to make one comment about what the minister said about some newfangled dashboard, procurement dashboard that they've launched today. And then he gave us the Tembisa example. He spoke so coherently about what has been happening at Tembisa, which shows that they've known about it for years, splitting up tenders to make them below 500,000. The ANC has been aware of that for years and years and years. But something fundamental has changed in this country. The ANC government no longer has an outright majority. So they need to pull themselves towards themselves. And these are green shoots today of showing that a government that doesn't have an unfettered majority can govern better.
All right, thank you so much, Athol Trollip, the parliamentary leader of Action SA. For more reaction, we cross back to you, Nompu.
Thanks very much. I'm joined by Yomzi Nkwankwa. He is from the UDM. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Your thoughts on the midterm budget today?
No, the signs are clearly there that the economy is recovering. I mean, we're looking at growth projections, which we are likely to meet now, and the fact that we have some bit of revenue overruns. We are not too certain, though, whether a proper study was done when it comes to revising the inflation target. Yeah, you can argue for both sides. The impact of reducing the target, for example, on nominal growth and the revenue that the government is going to get on the one hand. On the other hand, the ability, obviously, to reignite growth and for consumption expenditure to increase and all of that. But it would have been nice if a proper study had been conducted. The other thing is, when you're looking at it, for an example, is that the geopolitical tensions when it comes to the tariffs and all of that around the world, they don't seem to have affected the economy yet, but they will affect it at some future point in time. And some provision and planning process needs to be put in place to make sure that we're able to cushion the economy insofar as that is concerned. Fiscal consolidation is welcome, although it's termed differently now. I mean, if you're looking at the primary surplus, that's fiscal consolidation. If you're looking at the expenditure rationalization which has taken place in government, that also too is fiscal consolidation. But to what end? It's great that it helps us to manage debt and to be able to realize some saving when it comes to debt service costs. But we must look at whether it does not erode important social expenditure. That's where we need to be vigilant as parties and to look at whether or not even the expenditure savings that they were talking about when it comes to social grants, why are we only targeting the poor and not targeting the rich and the corruption, white-collar corruption and white-collar crime that's taking place in the country. It's great to see that the additional revenue given to SARS is beginning to pay some dividends, which was given at the beginning of the financial year. Yes, they still need to put more measures in place to try and make sure that they deal with tax fraud, tax avoidance in the country. Maybe once that happens, we are going to be able to realize even more benefits from that strategy.
And very quickly, your thoughts around the reduction of the inflation target. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's why I'm saying the reduction of the inflation target, it depends. That's why we're saying it would have been great if a proper study had been done instead of just a flimsy consultation on the matter, because it's relatively complex. aspects. On the one hand, he spoke about its effect, for example, on nominal growth and the effect on revenue, but which is short-term but long-term. He also spoke about the ability of that to actually help us with consumption, expenditure, and reignite growth, but also the cost of living generally in South Africa is going to help us with that. So it has some spin-offs, it has some pros and cons. It would have been great to have an extensive discussion around this issue so that once the decision is made to locate the inflation target at some level, that comes from an informed position, from a position where all the stakeholders have been extensively engaged on.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, then let's hand it back over now to my colleague Bulelani Philip.
Well, joining me now is Zuko Kodlimpi, the Deputy Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, who also heads the ANC's Economic Transformation Committee. Of course, Mr. Kodlimpi, firstly, let's start here. As the GNU partners, do you think that you'll be able to all rally behind this budget so that we don't see what we saw earlier this year?
Well, I mean, this is not a new budget, as you know. It's almost like a comment on the earlier budget. The assumptions that went into the initial budget, are they still intact? Are there any macroeconomic indicators that are demonstrating improvements? And what do we think the next budget is going to look like? So if you compare it to what was said in the initial budget, the broad structure of the budget is still pretty much the same. So on those grounds, I think the whole GNU is going to rally behind the budget because the MTBPS was reaffirming the perspectives that were outlined in the budget that was delivered earlier in the year. So I'm quite confident with that there will be no one who's breaking rank on this one.
But do you think this is a pro-poor budget in terms of making sure that the most basic critical things are catered for by the government instead of all of this economic speak about economic growth and inflation targeting and the like?
Well, I mean, economic growth is essentially about the poor. It is about providing wider employment opportunities for those who are outside employment. To deal with poverty, we need to create more employment, and that is what the growth agenda has to be substantially about. And the Minister of Finance reaffirmed that. When we speak about improvements to PRASA, you lower transportation costs because once people are now able to use trains as opposed to going to other modes of transport, that deals with the capacity of the poor to not spend higher proportions of their income on transportation. That is about them. The cost of living, every single person you speak to talks about the rapid rise of prices. If you buy bread around the same time last year, you come back now, it has gone up much higher. So when we talk about containing inflation, it is essentially about maintaining a lower cost of living, which then helps with the poor to deal with those. So yes, the economic jargon is sometimes frustrating, but the substance of what the work is about, it is about that. Stabilizing, for instance, ESCOM for electricity provision is in the interest of everybody. The discussion is about, yes, you've dealt with load shedding, but what do you do about lowering the cost of electricity? Because that is what also affects poor people.
Lastly and quickly, the review on the tendering system, is it an acknowledgement that the current system as it is, it enables corruption as well as price inflation?
I think there's no one who has ever denied that. No one can deny the fact that the current public procurement system, which is called the tender system, has massive, massive gaps, and those gaps are constantly being exploited by unscrupulous service providers. Like any other system you design, a system is as good as its capacity to give you efficient outcomes and deliver on services. Once there are too many loopholes, you know that there's a standard practice of price inflation and so on. You have no choice but to review that system.
All right, thank you so much, Zuko Kodlimpi, the Deputy Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition. He also heads the ANC's Transformation Committee. For more reaction, we cross back to Nobu.
All right, thanks very much for that, Bulelani. I'm joined by Vuyo Zungula. He's from the ATN. Mr. Zungula, very quickly, I can see the minister in the corner of my eye. Just give us your quick comment on the midterm budget.
Look, what the minister did today was to repeat the problems that you already know. There's nothing new that came. And what we have a problem with as a party is the fact that it's going to highlight what the problems are but not offer solutions. For example, the issue of illicit trade, it is something that is damaging to the economy because illicit trade affects the health of South African citizens. It also affects how SARS cannot collect proper taxes, but at the same time, he's not availing resources to SARS to capacitate SARS for them to actually fight illicit trade. So what we do not want as the ATM, it is a principle whereby they recite the already known problems. For example, at a local government level, they keep talking about how they are employing consultants to do the work that the people that are employed by the local government should do. But they are not offering any solutions to say how are they going to stop that. And then the last issue, it is the issue of loans. They keep taking loans that will inevitably have to be paid by South African citizens, but there's no real value that we as South African citizens see from the amount of loans that we're taking as a country.
All right, Mr. Zungula, thank you so much for your time there. Mr. Zungula from ATM. Let us take it now back to my colleague, Bulelani Philip.
All right, for more reaction now, we are joined by Imran Musa, who is a member of parliament of the Al-Jama party, and of course is also part of the government of national unity. Firstly, the framework that has been laid here, nothing new really. Much of the adjustments were expected. As the Al-Jama party, in terms of the minister's presentation, do you think that has been able to touch the right spot?
Yes, absolutely. Look, as a government of national unity, the retreat did very well in that, they found solutions moving forward. The only way to move the country forward is, ensuring that collectively there's an agreement. And I think the retreat with the president recently has solidified the situation with regards to the GNU and ensuring that there's financial stability. It is difficult under the circumstances. South Africa doesn't have enough funding. We expect that many of the conglomerates, the corporates, to assist government in terms of partnership so that, the fiscal can be improved. I think that's in a nutshell what, as Al-Jama, we should be looking forward towards, and especially that we're combating the poverty with 62%. I think that's a great step forward.
Pronouncements on infrastructure investment, particularly trying to drive economic growth, do you think it's gone far enough?
Look, it's difficult under the circumstances, we must admit, but look, we've got to keep on trying as best as we can. And as I said earlier, finding solutions, one of the ways and means is to ensure that we have partnerships with private enterprises, conglomerates, corporates, so that we can improve our fiscal.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to bring in Rise Mzansi's leader, Songezo Zibi, who also chairs Scopa. I'm going to come to your forte, which is the issue of making sure that the government's resources are used for the right purposes. Now, if we look at the pronouncements around the issue of the reviewing of the tender system, your reaction to that?
Look, there's more than reviewing the tender system. Of course, there are certain things that within the government procurement space need to be managed better. I'll make an example. Contract management and project management is a huge problem. This is where projects that have fallen behind schedule nonetheless have the suppliers getting paid for poor quality work, even though the work has not actually been done. The government leaks tens, if not hundreds of billions of rands over the medium term in that sphere. It's very important that that gets nipped in the bud. Let me give you a second example where we've got inefficiencies in the system. The Road Accident Fund gets allocated about 50 billion rand per year. 4 or 5 years ago, it was finalizing 253,000 claims with 43 billion rand. It now only does 63,000. Still with 43 billion rand. Legal costs are up 70%. That's a value per claim, and legal costs have grown 4 times over. That money needs to go as far as possible. SETAs, it costs the same amount of money to put somebody through a SETA as it does through university. We need to look at that and understand why that is so expensive. So there's a range of work that still has to be done within government to make sure that every rand stretches as far as possible.
All right, thank you so much. Songezo Zibi, the leader of Rise Mzansi. And Nombu, I believe you're standing by with the Finance Minister.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. Well, I'm joined by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. Minister, you've delivered the midterm budget. You've confirmed that indeed you are going ahead with a new inflation target, a lower level, you say for 3%, but with a tolerance level of 1 percentage point on either side. Some people here are arguing that you've done it under pressure. Why now?
I was not under pressure. Let me just say, when I presented my budget vote, I said a lower inflation is good for the economy. That's what I've said throughout the process. In the statement that I issued, I said I cannot make a commitment until I've finalized the consultation process, the president, the cabinet, and all of those people. I've got that political responsibility of making sure that whatever decision I do, I carry the political leadership with me. So that's the issue.
So things seem to be coming along quite nicely in terms of the metrics. You're going to be building up the budget surplus. But some people are arguing that does it make sense to build up a budget surplus buffer when there's still so many things that need to be paid for and taken care of?
The choice you have is not to have a buffer and have escalating debt, right? And escalating debt service cost. Until the day you don't have money to fund that, and you go to the IMF, and the IMF teach you belt tightening. Those are the choice you have, or you do these changes, you cut, you make sure that that thing is going to reduce your debt, is also reduce your debt service cost. Already now we made the point, because we are reducing the debt service cost, we already have got a 4.8 billion rand benefit out of the debt cost reduction.
One of the first things you touched on in your speech was the issue of the fact that we're now off the grey list, but that we can't afford to sit on our laurels. So what work are you and the rest of the stakeholders going to be doing to ensure that we stay off the grey list?
You know, we are working, I'm a member of the security cluster of ministers. Among other things is our focus on organized crime, which will make sure that crime does not pay. You must understand that the two remaining things that made us difficult to come off the red list were the law enforcement ones. Among other things was to demonstrate effectiveness, that indeed you've got laws, but can you arrest people, can you prosecute them, and all of those things. So within the economic class, I think that's where the challenge is going to be. In money laundering, terrorist financing, we need the security class, and I think we're working very well to achieve to keep on track.
Minister, just elaborate further on what you were saying around positioning African countries in a good way in terms of our representation as a G20 presidency. What benefits is the continent and obviously South Africa going to get from this?
Let me just enumerate a couple of few things. We have managed to have what is called an African engagement agreement, where all the G20 countries are taking shape into it. Beyond South Africa's presidency, there will be this structure of the African engagement. Secondly, we have agreed on a debt declaration, which is a separate thing, unprecedented, where all of us will agree that the issue of debt on the African continent has got to be attended to. Thirdly, we have agreed that this current economic common framework needs to be reviewed, which is also assisting with debt response.
And very lastly, Minister, what lessons have you learned from the budget process this year? Because it was quite messy.
It's quite messy. Quite a few. There's a messy at the level of the government of national unity. I think we've sorted that. The consultation process that has taken place at the level of the government of national unity has been intensive. And as a result, at a government level, we're on the same side. The second part, which can be messy, is the parliamentary process. Because the parliamentary process requires a particular procedure when you amend the budget. None of the political parties, it was the first time people were trying to experiment from a lack of a dominance by one political party. We're going to experiment in amending the budget. And very few people were familiar with the legal procedures for amending the budget. I'm not sure to what extent has Parliament internalized that.
Right, Minister, thank you so much for your time. Go well, sir. All right, that was the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana. I'm going to hand it over now to Bulelani Philip.
Well, still a lot of talking points here on the precinct around the political reactions. Joining me now is the Chief Whip of the IFP, Nhlanhla Hadebe. Thank you so much for your time, sir. Quite a lot of talking points. I want to start here. The projections of economic growth by the Finance Minister, always missed year in and year out. Do you think they are realistic when you look at what is announced today?
Our feeling as the IFP is that this medium budget policy statement was a well-considered medium-term budget policy statement, balanced in our view, talks to growth, talks to stability. We feel South Africa is getting there in terms of giving that balance that we've always been looking for. The only thing that we must encourage as the IFP is fiscal discipline. That is the only thing that can take us back as this government. Otherwise, well thought of, well balanced, talks to growth. South Africa needs growth.
So as the GNU partner in this government of national unity, you'll be rallying behind the minister in terms of supporting this mini budget?
Absolutely. We will give him that much needed support as a partner in the government of national unity. We have no other choice. We entered into this government quite aware that there is going to be one or two challenges, but it's work in progress. We are optimistic and we are hopeful that South Africa will get there.
All right, thank you so much, IFP Chief Whip Nhlanhla Hadebe. For more reaction, we cross back to you, Nombo.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. Well, I'm joined now by the SARS Commissioner, Edward Kiswita. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. You've been sort of the star of the show, really, in the sense that you're under a lot of pressure. You've been given a bit more budget, 7.5 billion rand over the medium term, and you're expected to generate masses of revenue, some extra 50 billion rand per annum. How are you getting on thus far?
Nompu, let me just say, it's not easy. It's nice when the minister announces the result, but under the surface, there is an incredible amount of hard work by 14,000 people who I have the privilege to work with. And so just to give you some color, you spoke about the extra money. We have employed, in the first year of this project, we've employed 1,400 additional resources to collect more of the debt that is not generally easier debt, not complex debt. And this year we have increased that to 2,400, about another 900 odd people. But what also is happening is some of the debt that is on our balance sheet is now more complex. So it's not the simple phone call or a little nudge, a friendly letter. We now have to engage more legal instruments like applying for a court, a civil judgment, applying for a order, a writ of execution, where we need to protect a flight of assets to make sure that we have retained assets to cover the debt. So we need more litigation attorneys, we need more legal collectors, more complex, because we've seen an increase in a 35% increase in writ of executions. We see that there are many more taxpayers who want a debt compromise agreement or a debt repayment agreement. That requires more of a skill to be able to understand the balance sheet and an income statement, to look at the affordability. So the level of skill for that debt is harder. We've now brought just over 80 of that cohort of people, and we hope to increase that to 250. So far, our overall debt, including the debt project, have yielded, as at September, has yielded 47 billion. I'm pleased to say that October looks a little bit better, so we are now well over 50 billion. And we hope that every month we'll gain momentum as there's the learning curve benefit, so that we can get to the commitment we've made to the Minister. But overall, the compliance revenue this year has grown by 14% year on year, and the 18 billion higher than printed estimate that the Minister announced today, half of that is from compliance work.
Excellent work. Thank you so much, Commissioner. That was the SARS Commissioner, Edward Kiswita. Let me hand it over now to Bulelani Philip.
Thank you, Nompu. Once again, I'm going to jump straight into it and bring in now Dr. Joe Maswanganyi, who is the chairperson of the Standing Committee of Finance. Firstly, let's start here. The process going forward from after the delivery of this mini budget, how is it going to unfold?
After the Minister has delivered the budget speech, as you have heard, the Speaker has referred all the laws that the Minister, the bills that the Minister has tabled today to the Standing Committee on Finance and the Standing Committee on Appropriations. Friday, the Minister will come for a briefing to brief the joint committees of the NA and the NCOP. From there, next week, the next step, the 4 committees will be briefed by the Parliamentary Budget Office and the FFC. After that, we go for public hearings where the public has to come and make submissions, be it orally or in a written form. After the public hearings, National Treasury and SARS will come and respond to all the issues that the public will have raised. From there, we go back into a committee session, process the report as a result of a public submission, result of the inputs coming from the PBO, FFC, compile a report, adopt it as a committee, submit it to the NA. So the process is strictly 15 days in terms of the law.
We are in unprecedented areas now compared to other years. Normally the mid-term budget policy statement is normally presented in October. Does that not cut your work out for you, given also we are heading towards the festive season and Parliament will be rising, I think, in early December?
Of course, if you remember, the parliamentary schedule was seriously affected by the aborted February budget, where there were issues in the GNU. We are quite happy that there is no drama this time around. Like parties in the GNU are agreeing, which is good for the country. And we have been emphasizing that as Parliament, because Parliament is not GNU. GNU is at the executive level. That parties in the GNU must put the national interest above the party interest. So we are in this situation because of party interest. And I think moving forward, they have learned a lesson that they must be able to meet, like what the President has done a week ago, convene the GNU partners, deal with the politics, develops the terms of reference, develop what they call a clearinghouse. We are quite happy about that if the executive does that, because Parliament is an independent organ of government. We don't want to interfere on how GNU operates, but if they don't operate effectively and efficiently, there's no way that it won't affect Parliament. So we are quite happy that there is concurrence. They are placing the national interest above party politics. And we are going to make sure that as Parliament, we pass the budget in time for the sake of our people to dent poverty and unemployment.
All right, thank you so much. All the best in your work, Dr. Joe Maswanganyi, who is the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance. For more reaction, it's back to you, Nombu.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. Of course, we've been looking at the midterm budget, and we have, to finish it off, we have our resident economist for the day, Martin Ackerman, joining us. He's the chief economist at Citadel. And of course, we have Thokozile as well, who we were speaking to earlier. Thank you very much, Martin, for joining us. So one of the things that came out, a key thing, of course, that market players would be looking out at is the economic growth forecast. Slightly reduced for this year, 1.2% as opposed to 1.4%, but the expectation that over the medium term we will grow by 1.8%. What did you understand to be driving these numbers?
Yeah, I think it's crucial because everything that you measure against GDP, the deficit, the debt to GDP, the GDP number is very important. So if we get that wrong, the whole budget is out of whack. So I think it's prudent to reduce this year's number. There's still a lot of hard work that needs to take place, and we are making good progress with the policy reform and the implementation. And therefore, I do think that 1.8, and they actually had a 2% in 2028, that is achievable as long as the government of national unity remains stable and we continue with deep reform. We'll get to those numbers. So I think, the economic numbers are very realistic, and that gives a little bit of hope that the actual other numbers that we're comparing to that is also ballpark right this time around.
And very quickly, what did you think about the inflation target announcement?
Yeah, I think at least now, it's out of the woods. There's been a lot of talks about that, created uncertainty. Now we know what we're dealing with. And I think, maybe not immediately, but longer term, if we lower inflation expectations, if me and you, all our inflation expectations are lower, it actually also means that trade unions are starting with lower inflation increases on salaries. So you baked in lower inflation in the economy, and then as a result of that, you've got structural lower interest rates, which will help all of us. And that is a cost of capital to get investment going into the country. So I think longer term, a step in the right direction, but still a little bit of hard work to get there, but we're moving in that direction.
All right, super. Thank you very much, Martin, for that. And of course, as I mentioned, I'm joined by Thokozile Madonko. She is a researcher at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at Wits University. Thokozile, you heard a little bit of the midterm budget speech this afternoon. What are your immediate takeaways with your hat on at looking at inequality?
So I think this medium-term budget policy statement is really asking the majority of South Africans, given our levels of high inequality, to do more with less. And what does that really mean? It means that we're expecting poorer households to deliver and reproduce themselves in ways that are going to be very, very precarious, because what we're seeing is a doubling down on fiscal consolidation or austerity, even though the assumptions being made in the budget is that with this lower inflation target, then the cost of doing government or providing public services will go down. But that's a huge assumption, and it's an assumption that is based on the long term, not the short term. So even National Treasury in the medium-term budget policy statement admits that there's going to be a cost in the short term of this inflation target, and the cost is for poorer South African households. And what is very, very concerning is that this medium-term budget policy statement, neither the speech nor the accompanying document, really talks about one key figure. So we talk about gross domestic product, GDP, but we don't talk about unemployment. And our inequality levels are highly linked to the levels of high unemployment in this country and high levels of youth unemployment in this country. And so when we are concerned about the ability of households to feed themselves, so our research that we've just done globally says 1 in 4 globally go hungry at night, skip a meal. And that is the same in South Africa. We cannot be talking about primary surpluses in a context where people are going hungry and are not able to put food on the table for their families. And so that becomes an important question around our social protection programs. And it's, again, a bit of a red flag that we're not seeing a real concerted effort by the National Treasury or the President to say that we will support a universal basic income grant in South Africa.
All right, Thokozile, thank you so much for that. Thokozile not happy at all about the midterm budget, saying that it really didn't address the major issues in the country, like inequality and high unemployment. And she's worried that this lower inflation target is going to hit the poor. And even though the authorities have admitted that this is the case, they say that this short-term pain is going to be worth it in the long run. But of course, only hindsight insight will tell us whether that is actually the case. Well, that's all from myself, but I'm going to hand it over now to my colleague, Bulelani Philip.
Well, Nombu, that also brings us to the end of this special broadcast of the 2025 medium-term budget policy statement. Thank you for lending us your ear. My name is Bulelani Philip.